what are the interesting differences, would you say, between the various psychedelics that you mentioned? Ayahuasca, DMT, acid, LSD, marijuana, mescaline, PCP, psilocybin, MDMA. All you mentioned a few of them. They're really interesting. We'll talk about scientifically some of the different studies that have been conducted on each, but sort of at the high level, what are some interesting differences?
Well, one of the big ones that people make a big deal of that I think is completely misplaced is some are from nature, some are from the lab.
Right.
So there's this kind of like romantic thought that if it's from nature, it's good. If it's from the lab, it's somehow tainted by humanity. Right. And, therefore some people are like all for plant psychedelics. We see the policy changes that have been happening in a couple cities, Cambridge, Somerville, right, not far from where we're at now, where they decriminalize plant medicines. So they call it decriminalizing nature. So I think that there is, from my perspective, certain things from nature are poison, certain things from the lab are spiritual, even if they don't show up in nature, like LSD. Now, there is something, LSD is lysergic acid diethylamide. There is lysergic acid amide, LSA, which comes from morning glory seeds. So it's very similar. But at the same time, I'd say I don't buy into that distinction that there's some fundamental preference. One of the things that Terence McKenna, since we talked about him, he talked about how if it's from nature, it's good. And if it's not, we should be suspect. Of course, he had a lot of great LSD experiences. But actually, Terence, in 1984, we were at Esalen with a bunch of other people. This was before the crackdown on MDMA. And this was some of the underground therapists and the above-ground researchers who were trying to talk about how to protect MDMA from this eventual crackdown. And Terence was like, forget about it. It's from the lab. It's dangerous. We have thousands of years of history, all these other things. And, what do we know about MDMA and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, Terence, you're so unscientific. Bullshit. Another way to say it is, and I just said, we need a study of the safety of MDMA. And so then Dick Price, who started Esalen, I said, I'll put 1,000. Dick Price, he put 1,000. So Terence was actually the catalyst for the first study with MDMA.
Wow.
Just because he was so frustrating about how plants are okay and, if it's from the lab, it's bad. Yeah. So that's one distinction. The other distinction is this sense of classic psychedelics versus things like MDMA. So to what extent do they dissolve the ego? And you could say, to what extent do they cause visions, the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor subtype, which is responsible for a lot of that, where these drugs are activating. Now, mescaline, of all the psychedelics, chemically, it's the most similar to MDMA. It's a phenethylamine, which is MDMA. So in the 50s, there was the 53, I think it was, the Army Chemical Warfare Service wanted to look at drugs for interrogations, mind control, non-lethal incapacitants. They did a study in 8 substances. These were now toxicity studies in animals. And on the one side was methamphetamine, on the other was mescaline, and MDMA was in the middle, chemically. So mescaline of these psychedelics tends to have the a warmth that MDMA has. It's not as ego-dissolving quite as some of the others. I mean, it's the main active ingredient in peyote. It is very psychedelic, very visual. Another distinction with these different drugs is how long they last. And a lot of that has to do with the route of administration. So, for example, if you smoke DMT, it takes 10, 15 minutes, and within seconds, you're off in another world. Similarly, 5-MeO-DMT, very rapid. When you take DMT in the form of ayahuasca, where it's mixed with another substance that makes it so that it's orally active, then it's a couple hours. So LSD is 8, 10, 12 hours sometimes. Psilocybin is more like 5 or 6 hours, or 4 to 6 hours. MDMA is similar. it's one reason why in our research we give an initial dose of MDMA and then 2 hours later we give half the initial amount to extend the plateau, because we want it to last longer for people to be in this therapeutic state. So that's another distinction is, how long these drugs last. Another distinction is which of them come from a religious context, have a religion built around them. We have this sense that some people are saying that 5-MeO-DMT and the Sonoran toad, that they have this long history of indigenous use, but they don't. That's all modern. It's made up, and it's kind of a new approach. However, there was thousands of years of use of psilocybin mushrooms in religious contexts. From 1600 BC to 396 AD, the world's longest mystery ceremonies, the Eleusinian Mysteries, sort of the heart of Greek culture, the heart of Western culture. That was a psychedelic potion called Kykeon that seems like it's very much like an LSD-like substance. Ergot on grain, and LSD comes from ergot. So I think that there are a lot of ways to look at these different substances. Another distinction is, which one of them are being researched right now in scientific contexts and which are not. And because of the rise of all these for-profit companies and everybody's looking for what they can patent, what they can claim, the land grab, more and more there are companies looking at every different kind of psychedelics. The ones that are most important that are not being researched, mescaline, but now there's a company to do mescaline, a Journey Lab. Ibogaine, which is crucial for opiate addiction. There's a new company, a branch of this company, Atai, that's going to be looking at Ibogaine. So I'd say the rise of the for-profit companies is making it so that there's just going to be an enormous amount of investigations into all these different psychedelics. But what we're going to see is the development of new psychedelics that we don't know anything about, that have not existed yet, because a lot of these for-profit companies are going to want to invent and patent and have composition of matter patents on new molecules. So I think we'll see a lot of that happening too.